industry in Britain. And so he became a very close colleague of Schumacher's and throughout Schumacher's life, and was certainly a very close friend of Schumacher's when Schumacher wrote Small is Beautiful. They were co-founders, George and Schumacher, of the Intermediate Technology Development Group. In 1965, at the time the world's outstanding organization for the development of small-scale technology in the developing world, the group still thrives. It's now called Practical Action. And George was for many years the president of the Soil Association, which is the UK's leading organization to promote organic agriculture. Prince Charles was and is the patron. George first came to PEI in 1975 as a guest of the Prince Edward Island Legislature, and he came back in 1982 for a conference that some of us organized. 1987 for the Institute of Island Studies. I was director, and I kept getting George back at every possible opportunity, and he was always incredibly positive, useful. People loved him, and he's become more and more, I guess, a part of Prince Edward Island, because he now lives here half of the year, and he lives with his partner Suzanne Manigault in Brackley Beach half of the year, and he lives in London half of the year. So it's really, really a great honor for us to have George with us today, and to have him with us as an Islander. So, George, is it possible?
Thank you very much.
Happy to introduce George.
Thank you very much, Harry, for that kind introduction. Do forgive me for remaining seated. I've got various ailments which would make it more difficult to perform standing up. That was a very kind introduction. I think much kinder than Fritz Schumacher has given me in the past, saying, here's George when he left Scotland and came down to England. The average level of intelligence in both countries went down. So you have to work that out for yourself. However, we never held these against each other, and it's my great pleasure today to share with you my memories of Fritz Schumacher, and who was, of course, the author of Small is Beautiful. This book opened our eyes to a world in which agriculture was being rapidly industrialized. That's basically the theme of what I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes. First of all, I start with Schumacher's concept of the proper use of land. This was one of Fritz's main arguments during the whole of the 1960s onwards. Farming was more dependent on large-scale industrialization, including the use of chemicals, fertilizers, pesticides and herbicides. Fritz was the first president of the Soil Association, which was and still is the main organization in Britain promoting organic agriculture and arguing that industrial chemicals are a threat to the health of the soil, plants animals and people who live on it. This is certainly one of the main issues affecting PEI at the present time. I quote, "Study how a society uses its land." This is what Schumacher said in chapter 7 of Small is Beautiful. And you can come to pretty reliable conclusions as to what the future will be like. An excellent study on these lines, conducted by Professor Helga Eisel of the Center for the Biology of Natural Systems at Queen's College, New York. Very strongly recommend this. I think we've got, I did manage to get one copy to you. I think we're now in the process of getting many more. It's a first class study. It was published by the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, entitled "The New York City Community Air Survey Results from Year 1 Monitoring 2008 to 2009. There is I introduce here a note that I received from government, which summarizes the government attitude to organic farming, which is, I think, equivocal, but certainly not objectionable in any way. For the past 2 years, the certified organic industry has had access to about $375,000 per year. The funding breaks down as 80% for direct assistance to farmers and processors wanting to expand their operations, and the PEI industry 15% funding to the Prince Edward Island Certified Organic Produce Cooperative, and ACORN, A-C-O-R-N, to create more cohesion within the province and region, and 5% for certification assistance for farmers and processors, 75% of cost to $500 per operation per year, at the cost of soil samples. So we have not got a situation where there's a major objection of any kind to, I think, helping organic farming in PEI. This is one of our problems. I'll start with looking at small-scale energy, a subject which always interested Fritz was small-scale renewable energy. In talking to students, Fritz then reminded them that he believed that if the Almighty wished to punish a country, he would allow it to find oil. And if he wanted to punish it seriously, he would allow it to find a lot of oil. No such dangers exist or are attached to small-scale forms of renewable energy as we find in wind, sun, small-scale hydro, and increasingly tidal power. Recent visits by two small-scale hydro experts, Tom de Wilde and Ron McLeod, to the McPhail homestead property in PEI, confirmed that its small stream had the potential to meet the electric power needs of the property itself and, say, batteries for 2 school buses. It's a very simple example of where we need to start by looking. Next, let me touch on wind power. Small-scale wind power already has a foothold in PEI, and its potential needs to be further explored. Wind and solar power could also provide power for the local electricity grid. I remember with great pleasure Fritz smiling as he read the brilliant Amory Lovin's proposal to decentralise the power grids by having every house now built produce surplus electricity from solar and wind power to feed into the grid. It would get rid of grids altogether in a concentrated form. These then could be explored. This should be explored in the PI context. Next, on energy conservation, an area in which a lot could be done. The saving of energy and the substitution of renewable forms of energy for non-renewable forms could also provide an integral part of what I've envisaged as Schumacher PEI energy policy. In its simplest form, it would start with the substitution of energy-saving electric light bulbs for conventional ones. To my knowledge, this has been done in Australia, but I don't have details of whether it has been proved successful or whether it's raised antagonism of what has been done in one country, and it appears to have been done very successfully. In its simplest form, it would start with the substitution of energy-saving electric light bulbs for conventional ones. A recent study by Tom de Wilde for the World Bank shows huge increases in demand for small-scale solar and mini hydropower units while advances in architecture and building open up new markets for thermal energy, tapping the Earth's internal energy. No one has yet tried to look at how tapping the Earth's internal energy might further reduce, might further increase problems with climate. That's a joke. But it is certainly a major source for new small-scale energy. The Schumacher PEI energy plan is, of course, a figment of my imagination. It is my sincere hope that you'll turn it into a reality. Thank you very much.
Any questions? George is a bit hard of hearing, so I can help him.
Thank you.
I'll help him receive questions. Yes.
Do you have any speculation to the economic cost of such a transition, of changing our non-renewable sources of energy and then dismantling those and creating more renewable sources, such as using our water and wind?
Do you have a sense of the economic cost of transition to renewable? The economic cost of the transition from present to renewable?
Sorry, from
the economic cost of a transition to renewable energy.
No, I think this is one of the things that needs to be further explored. You know, if I were looking at this standing from point of view here, this is something that PEI has got to start looking at. It would be certainly part of a study to be made by people who are looking at the establishment of a thoroughly carefully documented energy policy for PEI. Offhand, it would be difficult to provide any figures, but the fact remains that this is probably the first thing to do in looking at an energy policy. See to what extent it can be done relatively free from cost at this stage. And I think I would certainly say thank you for raising probably the first issue to be raised in putting forward an argument for a proper energy policy for PEI.
Thanks. There's another question.
If I understand it right, right at the moment it's not a matter of cost, it's a matter that maybe 40 years ago or however many years ago that they put laws and stipulations in place that prevents us from using our own water. That the Maritime Electric has bought our rights, and that it's our laws that need to be shifted, and the money situation will follow.
She's saying that the laws need to be changed. I think it's more a comment than a question, right? You're not asking George a question. It's more you're making a comment. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So, is there? Yes, Roy.
I'm wondering about the issues of security of supply, the impact on the environment, the impact on the air and the water, are these not factors that should be considered as well as the economic factors in looking at this transition? This gentleman raised the question of the economics. I don't think economics should be the priority, or it should be one part of a big question, a big picture, looking at security of supply, looking at the impact on water, on wildlife, on air pollution, on all these other factors, the quality of life. Shouldn't these be included?
So yes.
Thank you.
Again, it's yeah. I think that the answer can safely be yes. and it is more a comment, of course, than actually a question, George. Is there maybe one more question?
Okay, go ahead.
I think the man in the back may have beat you to the punch.
Is dual metering allowed on Prince Edward Island if you build your own roof with solar panels? Is it allowed under Maritime Electric or whatever?
Someone else would have to answer that question, and I don't think George would know that.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, just if you want a good story about Schumacher, that's.
Oh, okay.
What was the question?
My question was, has there been any inventory done on the island that you're aware of with our rivers, with our streams in the last 10 years? Has there been an inventory of resource, for example, on the tidal capacity or the river, the waters that are, do you know of any kind of study that has been done?
I would say no.
I'd say back in the days of the Institute of Man and Resources, Andy Wells did study the potential, but it is a potential, it's not very large.
Yeah, and the stream potential, I mean, I think Ron McLeod, George mentioned that he was here a week or two ago, and we have our streams we're so flat, and the streams aren't very large, so there's not much hydro, and so just locally, yeah.
This is
David, okay, this is, okay.
Sorry, Harry. I should mention that the Institute of Land and Resources programme was what first drew my attention to the existence of PEI. When I wrote as small as possible, I've actually quoted the fact
The whole chapter.
Yes, that, and they tried to reproduce the very high quality of that study. And it is one of the many tragedies that we look at when we look at energy. Well, this was a tragedy to have dropped that whole program, but there it was dropped, and it needs to be revived in certainly different forms, but it needs to be revived.
I think that's probably a good place to
I first met George just a couple of weeks ago, actually, at the McPhail Homestead, where there was a lecture given in his name, the second annual George McRobie lecture. And after the lecture, I sat next to George and Suzanne and introduced myself, and I was immediately enchanted. Perhaps it was the accent that got me. And actually, George grew up just a few miles up the road from where my mother was born and grew up, and they're contemporaries. So I don't know, did you date my mother at any time, George? Is that possible? They were literally just around the corner. Anyhow, it's so lovely to have a living connection to somebody who was so pivotal in changing the idea of what economics can be about, E.F. Schumacher, and to have somebody here today who worked with Fritz Schumacher, wrote with Fritz Schumacher, and knew him well, just blows my mind. I remember when I first read Small is Beautiful when I was in my 20s, I think, and it really blew my mind. And anyway, it's just wonderful to have you, George. It's a tremendous privilege and pleasure that you were able to join us this morning. I'm jealous of George for many reasons. One being his name. You know, I'm from Scotland and I get Bevan Baker, you know. I always wished I'd been called like Hamish McSporran or something like that. But George McRobie would have been just fine too. So could you please give a warm thank you to George. going to take just a 5 or 10 minute break, get some coffee, and then we'll have our first panel.
So in the news